Kamusta po kayong lahat? Thank you for having me. We live in times filled with unparalleled danger and opportunity. We are confronting the consequences of a pandemic that has exposed structural weaknesses that would have otherwise taken decades to reveal. World leaders have been struggling to confront the impacts of the pandemic because of a deficit that has been left unaddressed. Something we've lived with for so long, few notice its absence. I'm referring to resilience and its persistent absence from considerations of macroeconomic fundamentals across the world. Many have called the pandemic a black swan event, but this is a mistake. The pandemic we are all confronting today has been projected for years, if not decades. But because we only know how to measure productivity, because we only give importance to GDP, economies around the world have demonstrated how ill-prepared they are in responding to non-financial external shocks. Our setting needs urgent correction, because this is not going to be the last pandemic threat we will confront in our lifetimes. Certainly, warming global temperatures will likewise impose just as lethal blows expected to disrupt lives and livelihoods massively in the near term and the long run, with impacts falling disproportionately again on those who are least responsible for the climate crisis. What this means is simple. Unless and until we establish resilience at the heart of macroeconomic fundamentals, we will continue to be ill-equipped to deal with great and growing uncertainties in a world vastly different to what life was before February 2020. Is our country headed in this direction? Unfortunately, no. Or at least not yet. Decision makers still seem to be in a hurry to get back to pre-pandemic realities that unfortunately is no longer possible to return to. That past is past, while the future presents an array of choices. One kind of thinking is dominant, and it keeps strongly to the illusion that we can return to pre-pandemic realities without asking not only whether it is possible, but whether it is even desirable at all. If this mindset prevails, we will only bring back all the baggage and conceits that embedded fragility in our economic system. If we stick to this approach, it means we will have learned little from the collective pain the pandemic has inflicted on everyone, as working class families carry the heaviest burden. This kind of thinking assumes we can and will continue to live large and squander the possibilities of long-term development in order to chase dreams of profligate affluence without having to deal with the consequences of narrow, short-sighted thinking. It is why the organization I'm part of, the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, or ICSC, is organized the way it is. It's why we run our campaigns the way we do. Because as we often say, climate change is bigger than everything. And yet, it is also not necessarily the most important issue for the country. Climate change is not necessarily more important than poverty, health, hunger, shelter, or jobs. Our teams are organized around key programs that are designed to leverage maximum gain in terms of durable but also demonstrable transformation. We are an international climate policy group that's been around for a long while. We began as an informal initiative in 1998 to provide technical studies and campaign support for community and women-led campaigns to defeat a proposed coal plant in Pulupandan, Negros Occidental. We formally registered as a non-stock, non-profit organization with the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2005. 2 years later, we launched the country's first electric public jeepney fleet, a project we ran in Makati, Bacolod, Puerto Princesa, and Tacloban for almost 10 years. This is what we often do. We take on first mover risks in order to generate experience points and lessons that we share with the public. This way, we help accelerate the change process because we invest in our own ideas. When we come up short or do well, others will know what to sustain or what to discontinue. Since 2010, we've added climate governance and climate finance to our portfolio, providing platforms where insights from the scientific community, domestically and abroad, are shared with policymakers, especially the country's economic managers. We have an urban transitions team in recognition of the fact that cities represent 70% of climate polluting emissions. In this way, cities are both a large part of the problem and at the same time they represent much of the opportunities. Today we are focused on advancing active, inclusive mobility. We're doing so not to chase emissions reductions, but to ensure the mobility interests for the great majority of our people are prioritized. Here's a fact some of you might not realize. 88% of households in Metro Manila, 88%, together do not own their own cars. It begs the question why government has been prioritizing for decades the interests of a tiny minority of car owners. The other side of this coin says that when we prioritize the majority's interests, our goal would be to move people, not cars. We are also determined to help realize an early and durable energy transition in the country, away from what is harming our economy and towards a system that can enable economy-wide transformation that results in far higher efficiencies. It is important to promote systems thinking rather than peddle technologies. And because the truth is still evident only to a few, the challenge is how to continuously impress on key sections of the public why reality is different from what most have mistakenly assumed. Coal-fired power plants, for instance, are unreliable, intermittent, expensive, and polluting, while renewable energy is more affordable, more reliable, and definitely sustainable, and renewables also promote energy security. We can actually discuss in advance the energy transition debate, even without climate considerations. But certainly, when we favor the transition towards reliable, affordable, secure, clean power, the co-benefit is we also contribute to the global struggle to decarbonize. It means as we prioritize the pursuit of better development, which sustainable power generation is an integral part of, we also end up contributing to global goals, aiming to stave off the threat of irreversible, dangerous climate change. Ultimately, what working households expect and what businesses appreciate is neither quote-unquote greenhouse gas mitigation nor quote-unquote climate adaptation programs, but strategies and initiatives that secure for our people better and long-term development, using inclusive processes that hopefully encourage participation and which can promote greater public ownership of climate change sensitive development strategies. This approach led us to set up, for instance, our storage and solar training facility in Tacloban in 2014. Our goal that year was to establish roots so we can stay and build bridges and pay it forward programs long after most humanitarian and relief groups working on the impacts of Super Typhoon Yolanda would have left Eastern Visayas. Today, our facility is home to the pioneering Solar Scholars Program, where we train climate change survivor communities to understand deploy, and assemble community renewable energy systems. Most importantly, they are trained as well to train others. Today, solar scholars assemble what they call tech packs, or modular community energy systems, that they provide to communities hit with emergencies. This includes training community members in conducting energy audits in their households and barangays, as well as determining and managing the kind of renewable energy systems that can work in their areas. Many of them are women, and all are working class. We're proving one of our main points. Renewable energy is not the domain of men alone, nor is it the enclave of the educated and well-off. It can and will serve the needs of the poor, as well as middle-class families and small and medium enterprises. This is also the reason why we continue to run our Small Island Grids Transition campaign, because we get to save over $200 million annually the sooner we can hybridize our systems with solar power combined with diesel or storage. The Department of Energy is already fully convinced that hybridization is the way to go, and our work now is to help ensure electric cooperatives gain a portion of the savings so they can also upgrade their services and provide stable systems for the communities they serve. And when small island grids transition to cleaner energy systems, everyone gains, because you all get to reduce the universal missionary charge for electrification charged to main island customers. Why have we taken such an approach? Because it proceeds from the peculiar logic produced when we turn the climate change problem and its solutions on its head. The climate crisis is not an environmental issue. Or we can also say the environmental crisis is a mere subset of climate change, because fundamentally, climate change is an outcome of a development crisis and a crisis of democracy. This is what happens when anthropocentrism is left to thrive unchecked, a philosophical viewpoint embodied subconsciously by most humans today, which argue that, quote, human beings are the central or most significant entities in the world who are separate from and who think they are superior to nature, unquote. It happens when the interests of a few humans prevail over the needs of the majority of humans in the world as well. It is for this reason why we often ask climate change campaigners and development advocates to be specific when describing problems and solutions. This is why whenever we can stress the role, we stress the role of micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs in the climate context. They make up over 99% of businesses in the Philippines. In 2018, MSMEs contributed close to 36% of the country's gross domestic product, generating 5.7 million jobs, or over 63% of the year's total employment. And yet MSMEs occupy too little space in the climate change debate. This needs to change, and we need to steadily measure our ability to enhance the country's protection against the impacts of the climate crisis while increasing productivity despite the constraints of climate change by its positive impacts on MSMEs. We have spent far too little time dwelling on the potential of MSMEs to unlock more responsive protection in low-carbon development products and services among our MSMEs. Doing so will only accelerate interest in deepening and quickening climate action in the country, led hopefully not just by government, but by the private sector, cooperatives, and households as well. The Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department, for example, tells us the repair of motor vehicles and motorcycle sector accounted for 46.4% of total MSMEs in the country in 2018, followed by the accommodation and food services and manufacturing sector at 14.5% and 11.7% total shares, respectively. Imagine the opportunities to retool labor. Imagine opportunities made available when we help propagate more MSME-tailored risk transfer mechanisms. As the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, or MCII, and the V20 group of finance ministers have noted together, MSMEs are important drivers of socio-economic growth, arguably a key prerequisite for resilience and government revenue. We thus need to imagine the challenges MSMEs need to hurdle if they are to recognize and seize opportunities they are facing. Again, wise counsel from the V20 and MCII. Quote, MSMEs are often particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events and suffer from high electricity costs to the detriment of their productivity and growth. Low carbon technology options with deflationary costs for technologies such as rooftop solar and other more energy efficient equipment and infrastructure may help in addressing the latter. It is, however, difficult for MSMEs to secure upfront funds or financing options such as loans or leasing mechanisms. As a result, they are typically left with high operational costs, preventing them from investing in improving productive and operational efficiencies to increase the profitability of their businesses. MCII and V20 also raised the way the experience of climate vulnerable countries show an at least 90% protection gap for climate risks and non-life insurance penetration, typically indicative of the degree to which the private sector is covered, often lies below or between 1 to 2%. And yet, better insurance access and uptake among MSMEs can not only help to protect economic growth, but also reduce contingent liabilities on governments' balance sheets, thereby widening the fiscal space for development. Unquote. Colleagues, it's time we take MSMEs far more seriously when formulating plans that attempt to bake climate change into long-term development strategies. We've still got a long way to go, however. The reality is that MSMEs are often too small to be of interest to larger finance institutions. At the same time, microfinance institutions, according to the V20, and I quote, cater predominantly to household-level clients, while micro-enterprises require additional product features beyond those of personal insurance offerings. Thus, small and medium-sized enterprises fall into the missing middle because they are too big for MFIs, yet often also too small and too risky for the formal banking sector. In addition, MSMEs often have less formalized or very distinct cash flows and hence fall outside of a marketable client base. They need distinct premium and payment systems that accommodate their differing and sometimes more irregular economic cycles. Unquote. To take on climate change, colleagues, therefore, we will need everyone, because everything counts and everyone will and should matter. To take on climate change, we need to make everything more resilient, which in reality means we need to upgrade everything from infrastructure, urban services, supply chains, logistics, and food supply. And when we upgrade everything, understand that we will end up pump priming the economy and we will produce more jobs, which is one of the more important outcomes of climate action that we must recognize. It is time, colleagues, to break down our own silos and to take action as individuals. But also as individuals, it is our responsibility to influence our households and neighborhoods and workplaces. And we need to reach out to others, because individually we are small, but acting together we become far larger and far more formidable. We have no time to waste. The time to act is now. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay po kayong lahat.